All right, so welcome to the second of our publishing workshops. We'll be talking for 75 minutes about peer review. Okay. So we're going to start off by talking a bit about the rationale for peer review. Why do we have it as a system? I'll talk very briefly about the peer review process, just a very brief overview of what the process entails. We're going to spend a sizable chunk of the workshop on trying to make it so that peer review does for you what it's supposed to do. Peer review is a quality control system. It's supposed to make sure that you maximize the value of the work you're trying to contribute to a body, to the literature of interest to you. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about concrete strategies to apply to the evaluative process of your own work. We'll talk a bit about some special topics, some of the things that might come up here and there with different aspects of peer review, and then we'll leave some time open for questions. Okay? So why do we have peer review? Well, for one thing, like I mentioned before, peer review is the quality control system that many different scientific fields have for evaluating scientific work and making sure that it passes threshold for acceptability and contributing to a knowledge base. And the reason why we're talking about it is that if I were to show of hands, who here has taken a class in peer review? Anywhere. Undergrad, graduate school, webcast. No, none of us has taken a class on how to work within this system, even though this system is integral to all of our work and building up a sufficient body of knowledge to contribute to the field, and then even demonstrate that you can contribute work that's of value to your peers. And so we're going to wind up spending a lot of time talking about concrete strategies to apply in the context of evaluations of your work. So I titled this workshop Gross Anatomy because if you look at the wiki definition, it's the branch of anatomy that deals with the structure of organs and tissues that are visible to the naked eye. There isn't a single thing about peer review that feels like it's visible. It feels all covert. So we're going to do a lot today is make the covert overt and sort of understand sort of peer review within its inner workings and a lot of the things that might come as a surprise to you. But I always start this workshop by asking people some questions. So show of hands. Who here submitted a manuscript for publication? Okay. So about half the room. Who here has ever had a manuscript rejected for publication? Like last week and the week before that. Ever submitted the same manuscript to multiple journals? All the time, right? Ever had a manuscript go through multiple revisions at a journal before it was accepted at that journal, right? R5, right? R6, R7, R's revision. Ever had a manuscript accepted for publication? Yeah, right? Some successes, yay, that's nice. Who here likes peer review? Who here likes it? Ooh, look at that. All right, so a handful of you do. I do not promise you that you will like peer review by the end of this workshop. I will not make that promise, but I will make the promise that by the end of it, you should be able to appreciate peer review if you don't now. Very brief primer, because only a few of us here in the audience have submitted papers and things like that, so it's probably good to go over some of this stuff. Okay, so every submission process for a paper, any one paper you submit, has several different components. A lot of this stuff happens even before the paper even gets reviewed. So from the author's standpoint, choosing the outlet you're going to submit, preparing the manuscript to fit their format, making sure that you have a good cover letter. Cover letters are really important. We'll talk about cover letters throughout the strategy section of this. And And then the editor chooses a set of people to evaluate the work. If they're not the person handling it, they'll pick another editor to do it for them. They'll call an associate editor, but all of them collectively are called action editors. The action editor takes, solicits reviews from peers, from people who might have good content expertise in the subject matter of the paper, and sometimes people who don't have content expertise but are really good constructive reviewers that tend to have a broad understanding of the field in general. Sometimes editors will pick those folks too. And then once the editor receives those reviews, they evaluate the reviews, they make a discrete decision as to whether or not the manuscript should be rejected for publication, accepted, maybe it needs work, maybe invited for advisory submit. We're gonna spend the grand majority of our time in that space where an editor says, your paper has got some issues, but it's not so bad that I'm gonna reject it. I'm gonna give you a chance to take the comments to heart, revise the paper, and send it back so we can look it over some more. We're gonna spend the grand majority of our space there, of our time there, and I'll discuss later on why. So, like I mentioned before, the editorial board of these journals, every journal's got an editorial board. In some respects, an editorial board is kind of like a political document, in that when a journal lists the people on that board, they're telling the rest of the field, they're sending them signals. This is the content area that we publish in. These are the people we rely on to evaluate the work. And then you as an author make a judgment call. Do the people on this board have the expertise to make me think that they can give me a fair review of my work? Right? So in some respects, as an editor shouldn't think of it like, let me just list a bunch of famous people and then people will like the journal. It's a combination of yes, I want people who are visible in the field, but I also want them to send a strong signal to prospective authors that these people can be fair. These people know my work, they know this content area, kind of thing. The timelines for reviews can vary considerably. So in some fields, you'll get responses in a matter of days or weeks. In other fields, several months. In psychology, the review timelines typically range from 1 to 3 months. And it usually isn't until you're told, well, when you first submit the paper, you might get an automatic email that tells you, we received your manuscript, we were able to open all the files, all that stuff. You should hear from us in 60 to 90 days. Usually, people fall within those timelines unless editors have a hard time finding reviewers. Like we just had one that we submitted to a journal in February, and it's June, and we finally got the decision back. And it was part of the reason why was that it was just really hard to find reviewers for that particular paper. Not a good time of year. People are on vacation. People are submitting grants. Their grant deadlines. So all these things can vary considerably from journal to journal and field to field. So then the action editor takes a look at the reviews, makes a decision, and comes to one of three decisions that I mentioned before: accept the paper, or reject the paper, or ask for what we call an R&R, or advisory submit. Most of the articles you'll read in a packet for class, in your own area, the papers you cite in the reference sections of your own paper, the grand majority of those, went through one or more rounds of revisions before they're eventually accepted. That's basically how the field works under very rare circumstances. Do people send that first piece of work in for consideration, or are told afterwards, actually everybody thought it was great, accepted, you're done here, wait for the page proofs, and then sign your life away so we can take ownership of all the stuff you just finished submitting? That never happens. That happens after several other times. So the reason why we're going to spend the grand majority of our time focused on the revise or submit piece is that in order to be a successful academic and published scholarly work, you have to have really strong skills in receiving commentary and responding to it. Okay? I'm also going to outline some bad news about peer review. Here's the key bad news. Who here has worked through their thesis or dissertation? All right. So think about like the least reliable measure, the one that you collected in your dissertation that you might even just have tossed out, where you're like, this did not work the way I thought it did. I'm going to throw this away and then just focus on whatever we collected that we did a good job, where we actually were precise and the alpha estimates were above 0.7. And so think about the very worst measure you've ever collected in any one of your studies, and peer review has a worse reliability estimate than that. It's really bad. It's bad for papers, bad for grants. There's actually a paper in Proceedings in 2018 that basically said, look, this happens. This is about as bad as you see in papers as well. Right? Also true across funding agencies. So this Australian, the Australia version of the NIH. There was a paper in American Psychologist in 2008 that basically found the same kind of thing. The review correlations, the correlations, iterative reliability among reviewers is really, really poor. So my favorite example, Dominic, I think it's Dominic Cicchetti, in the early 90s, took a bunch of papers that were submitted to a really high impact review journal in the cognitive behavioral sciences, and resubmitted the papers to a sample of reviewers. Already accepted. Papers are in the journal. Resubmits them to the sample. Take a look at the median kappas, 0.3 for, like, if you remember the Landis and Koch estimates for what good kappa is, look at that. In that Marsh paper from 2008, the one from for the Australia's version of the NIH, the Australian Research Council, you'd have to triple the number of reviewers, right, to get correlation estimates that are high enough where you're like, oh, I could use a version. If that was a measure in one of my studies, I'd be happy with it. But that still would be about 0.7. It'd still be too low for you to say to yourself with any degree of certainty, I can cut that score in half, or cut that score in two, and give one tiny piece money and the rest of them no money, right? So these elements of peer review are endemic across different ways of evaluating work. Here's the good news. The good news is that once you get into the revise resubmit stage, once they tell you, we can, based on these reviews, we'd like you to revise the paper and send it back, that's where peer review shines. Here's what I mean by that. I'll first say the caveat that under some circumstances you might have a paper that gets revised resubmit, you get comments and you're like, I don't need to make the Back to the Future car to make this a great paper. I can fix a few things and it's fine. So under some circumstances, the R&R process can get a little out of control. But has anybody in this room who submitted a paper and got it back ever said, the version they accepted is not as good as the first thing I submitted? It never happens. It never happens. And if somebody says it does happen, well, they should take a class in humility, for Pete's sake. That's the great part of this system. The great part of the system is that when your peers give you constructive feedback, or any kind of feedback, that results in you working through the feedback, sending it back for consideration, getting more feedback, and working your way through that process, the final version of that paper will always be better than the paper you first submitted. That's just the basic premise of constructive feedback and addressing feedback in your work. 90 plus papers into my career, I can't think of one piece of work I've had through the peer review process where I said to myself, first submission was better than the last. Nope. So we're going to work through a concrete map that you can apply to thinking about different elements of peer review. And any of you who are a bit nostalgic about all things board games, I was a huge fan of Operation. I don't know why, because I get kind of antsy for all things, and board games in particular, I guess. But there are pieces of the points in the board that actually resonated with me when I was thinking about ways in which to convey strategies about peer review. So we're going to use the board game operation and go through each of the different pieces that are relevant to understanding the R&R process. So the first piece is be a good detective, okay? So when we start thinking about, before we even start thinking about the R&R process, we should be thinking about which journals to submit to. And the reason why that's important is that you not only have control over where you submit, you have some degree of control over who evaluates the work. You might say to yourself, I get to pick my own reviewers? No, not necessarily, but you get to give people advice about the people you think might provide fair reviews of your work. So what I do whenever I work on my first submission is I'll look through the editorial board and I'll say, who here looks like they know the work that I do? Who here's got a reputation for being fair? And then start off from there. And this is something you actually should do. I mean, there's some evidence to indicate that the reliability of peer review can increase a little bit among those circumstances where people are allowed to pick reviewers. The way you do it, in some journal systems, you can see a spot or a field in the submission boxes where they're like, who would you like us to invite? Who would you like us to not invite? We'll get into not invite in a little bit. But you can do that there. But even if the submission system does that, I would also include it in the cover letter too. So I'm going to show you a template of what we do in our cover letter. All of these materials that we're going to show in little PDFs and stuff like, all of them are on Dropbox. So in that block 2 peer review section, there is a Word template that we use. The Word template we use for submission, it's in there. The template we use for our advisory submits are in there too. And then all the different examples we're going to go through from here on out, all of them are on Dropbox. Okay. I just didn't do a packet because that'd be like several hundred pages, and who needs that? The trees need that. So we're going to keep it for the trees. So this is a little excerpt from our cover letter. We do the same thing that everybody else does. We're pleased and excited to submit the following paper, insert title here, to the Journal of so-and-so. The IRB said we weren't too unethical and all those other things, and it's not being considered anywhere else. And then we get to this piece where we say, look, in our experience, it's been hard to find reviewers to give us constructive feedback about this area. So we respectfully request that so-and-so be invited to review the paper. Here's your name, here's your email. Name, email. And in this context, I usually will try to pick at least 1 or 2 people on the editorial board. And then sometimes, you might find that after that, you kind of are at a loss for who you might suggest there too. So then I also might include what we call ad hoc reviewers, people who are not on the editorial board, but who have some content expertise. There's nothing keeping you from asking them to. Right? Is the editor going to use all your reviewers? Probably not. They might use 1 or 2. They might pick, and they'll most likely use only 1 or 2, and then pick others for themselves as well. All right? But the trick is that you want to be able to put yourself in this kind of space, this position, because for those of you who are early on in your career, an editor is less likely to know the kinds of reviewers who can provide fair evaluations of your work than they are more established people in the field. Right? So a more senior author submits their paper for that journal. They usually don't need to tell the editor in the cover letter who to pick, because the editor has seen the work before. Oh, I know this area. I'm familiar with this person's work. I know that these 2 labs hate each other, so I'm not going to pick that person. But these other people are actually play well with each other. So I'm gonna make it so they increase the likelihood that there's no conflict of interest. And notice that I've been saying fair this whole time. The trick is, when you're picking reviewers, it's not like you're picking your aunt, or you're not picking your advisor, or you're not picking like a former advisor or somebody you've collaborated with before. You're picking people who have a reputation for being fair and for whom you share no conflict of interest. Okay? They didn't mentor you before, or they haven't worked with you on anything else that you've worked on and published. You might be at a loss for thinking about who those people are. So some really good places where you might seek out ideas would be, your own advisors, like who in your experience, might provide fair evaluations in this content area, and we'll talk a bit about what happens if you run into like an unfair person. Okay. So detective works, and now the brain, we're going to go through the brain in 3 parts. Okay, so this is the first one. The first thing, so let's say you submit your paper. It's been several weeks, right? Maybe months. And then you finally get the email, right? And it says, decision on your manuscript, but and the number, and you're like, right? Like at the roulette table, only worse. In that kind of context, you're emotionally aroused. You're sure you can probably make some good decisions in that context, but you're less likely to. And so what I do is I'll go in and peek at the letter and not do much more after that. We'll go in a bit about what we do following that, but I'm going to give you some illustrations to give you a sense of what this means. Okay. So several years ago, I just recently started at the University of Maryland. I think might have been like a paper that was evaluated in 2009. And we get a decision letter. And the editor says, it's okay. We want you to revise it and send it back. I'm like, okay, let's see what the reviewers have to say. Reviewer 2, because it always is reviewer 2. Reviewer 1 is very constructive. Great constructive reviews. We got a lot out of it. Take a look at that highlighted sentence first. Although the study does address important issues and addresses relevant literature, the study fails to engage literature relating to the adolescent period. In this regard, the manuscript absolutely misses the boat. And the piece at the end. The authors themselves have not bothered to examine relevant literature. Oh, we have a moment here, guys. Oxytocin, like that kind of thing. It's like we have some shared understanding. Now we feel good about the idea that people sometimes are really, really nasty to us. And then look, this is a 10-year-old example for a reason. This is an oldie but goodie. Like I haven't had one that's been this nasty. So when I do, I'll replace it. But this is an oldie but goodie. I like this part too. Second, although the literature review is interesting, it is quite lacking, and not just in the substantive content relating to the research areas, but also in terms of what a literature review is supposed to do. Basically, like good papers do this, and this paper simply does not do that. This is the climax. This is where we get to the kicker here. Given the above issues, I have not read the rest, but I took a peek at the discussion, and it sucks too. Yeah. So, in what mental frame do you think I'm in when I first read this? Right? Am I supposed to revise this paper immediately following seeing this? No. What kind of frame am I going to be in? So, what I do when I get any decision, no matter how nice it is I take a peek, or nasty it is, I take a peek and I let it sit. I skim. I figure out what's the decision. Am I sending this back? Am I going somewhere else? What am I doing, right? And then just wait a few days, 2 to 3 days, right? It's because once you remove yourself from that immediate response, this idea of, why did they think that about the introduction? I thought that was a clear introduction. I showed all my co-authors. They thought it was great. Like, there are so many different ways in which you can react to that are not constructive. So just peek and let it sit. So you can accept your emotions, move it out of the way, because now you start planning, right? What I do at the beginning of every R&R decision letter is I itemize the decision letter. I do not do one thing. I don't change an and or but or therefore or nothing in that paper until I itemize the decision letter. Even if the reviewers don't provide them itemized, like 1, 2, 3, 4, I do it for them, right? I'll show you an illustration of this in a second. So yeah, this is our template. Our template, which is also on Dropbox as well. You have that there too. I always start off our cover letters like this. Thank you for the positive feedback. We're really happy to revise the paper. Made us think about a lot of things. And then I briefly, kind of like an abstract format, I specifically state some of the things that we revised. And then I even tell them, look, you see that? Second to last sentence, we have highlighted in yellow all of the text revisions. We'll go into that in a little bit. But then what I just do is I take the comment word for word in quotation marks, and then right underneath, I itemize a place where I'm going to put the response to each comment. Okay, so we accepted our emotions, we planned things out, and now we make a deal with ourselves, right? Because once we itemize the decision letter, we have a plan, right? And what I do in my own work is I plan it out. Let's say I got 30 comments. Across 3 reviews, I got 30 comments. On the surface, sounds like a lot of work, right? But then I make a deal with myself. I say to myself, they want my paper back in 45 to 60 days. So my deal is I'm going to address 1 comment a day. 30 comments, I'm done in a month. And then and then the co-authors can see it and look at it and all those other things. And in that context, it's fine to start off easy. So you got 30 comments. Let's say one of them is like missing a typo in table 3. Okay, done. You can start off with those first, and then just work your way around. Day 1 can be reviewer 5, comment 12. Day 2 can be reviewer 2, comment 4, and then just hack them off over and over and over again until you're done. So yeah, I'm going to give you a snippet of the revisor submit that we sent back for that first paper where reviewer 2 was like really, really mean, and we were like, why did we even get the chance to revise it back, right? So you'll notice I'll point out some key things. So remember when reviewer 2 told us that we missed the boat in the introduction? Look at that. We thank reviewer 2 for noting that our manuscript has important strengths, not the least of which are its use of strong measures and longitudinal data. Have you guys ever seen those movie posters where it says like the word fantastic or awesome? But if you read the whole sentence, like this is an awesome piece of fantastic crap. That's yeah. So at the beginning of these reviews, what I always do, even if a person's really mean, they usually say at least one nice thing. I'll put it at the top of the review, right, to remind the editor, because the editor is handling 20 of these things at a time. Like this, they're busy, right? Yeah, to remind them, look, even this person who kind of hated this said something nice, right? So that must be some value in what I do. And then that first comment, the missed the boat comment, look how that starts off. We thank reviewer 2 for pointing us toward articles in the adolescent development literature that speak to issues of So your reaction to going back to or addressing a comment, you might say like, that hurt, so I want to punch back. No. When they go low, we go high. Right? So you always flip this. Even if they're negative, make it constructive. Force it to be constructive. Because one of the things you'll learn about addressing commentary is that not everyone will be nice to you. There are like great like Avengers people who'll be nice to you, like Captain America and Black Widow's going to give you a hard time, but they mean well. They want you to get better. And some people are going to be like, Thanos, I want to get rid of you like this. The people are just going to be like that. That's just the way the world works. And so the trick is trying to figure out ways to be constructive even when somebody's trying to be destructive. All right, and a key component of it is taking that cover letter and reframing everything negative. Not to paint it with a positive blush, but just to say, look, editor, this person was really mean, but look how nice I'm being. Look how constructive I'm being. I'm not fighting back. I'm not doing anything nasty. And then editors tend to take those people with a grain of salt afterwards, just as long as you're not throwing it back at them. Here's one that's important to think about. When you get those 30 comments, or how many comments you get from the reviewers, right? When you get those back, go in with the mindset that you're trying to fix every possible thing they're asking. Because that revise resubmit process is one of those things where you get the reviews, you make revisions, you send it back, right? And the part of the reason why the R&R process is so useful is that with very few exceptions, those same people are being asked to review it again, right? So a reviewer 2 at first submission tends to be a reviewer 2 on second submission, unless reviewer 2 is on vacation or doesn't even want to review the paper anymore or something like that. Okay? So you should always take it on the assumption that the person who gave you the feedback is also going to see how you responded. Under very few exceptions does that not hold. All right? If you cannot fix everything, here's one thing you do. That cover letter. The reason why we're going to talk about the cover letter so much is that the cover letter arguably is as, if not slightly more important than the paper you actually send back. Because the cover letter is where you're going to summarize to people not only what you changed and how you changed it, but in some circumstances, if you can't find a way to reconcile a key issue that the reviewers raised, the cover letter is a way for you to justify what you didn't do or what you might have done instead. Okay? So if you don't want to do something the reviewer says they'd like you to do, a new analysis that you think doesn't make much sense, or they want you to sub out your theoretical frame of your introduction and put another frame that they like more, you know? There are some things you just want to plant yourself down like a tree and say, no, I'm not going to do that. The cover letter is where you have to justify that. And there's obviously an inherent risk, when you do those things. But the key thing is in the cover letter, you want to justify it. And so here's an example that's also in the Dropbox folder. So this is a different paper, was submitted a couple of years ago, and we got some great constructive feedback from one of the reviewers. And the reviewer was basically noting that the introduction was missing a chunk that if filled would dramatically increase the ability to form a good rationale for the paper, right? And so what we said in response was, we added this piece in the introduction. Right? And sometimes you can just say we added some more material, see page 3, whatever. But in this kind of context, because it looked like the reviewer was hitting on this point a lot, like I'm missing this. Maybe it's because I don't have a background in this area, but I really do think this needs to be in there. We thought, maybe in addition to beyond just saying this is what we did in the introduction, just telling them exactly what was there, and we highlight that piece in the paper too. Here's one. This comment had to do with this idea that the way we thought about a particular element of the paper, namely context, social context, was different than the way that the reviewer typically sees the word context. They are saying, this is an incomplete definition for context. There are many other ways to think about contextual factors and understanding, in this case, social anxiety. And so we thought to ourselves, well, we can't address this context piece directly in the paper. Like, we don't have a new measure of some other kinds of environmental. This is an archival study. And so what we thought to do instead was say, well, we can't add this to the paper. We can talk about it full ahead as a limitation of the study, which is what we did. In the discussion section, we just said, we highlight that this aspect that the way in which we thought about context was limited. There are other ways to think about context in the context of our study, and so we recommended that future research build on what we were looking at and add in additional contextual factors other than the ones that we focused on. Okay, is it foolproof? No. The reviewer might have come back and said, not good enough for me. Would have been better if you actually used it in the study. Sorry. They can do that, but as long as you come back and are giving them some change, some important change to the paper in some way, shape, or form that tends to assuage the concerns. Because on balance, the reviewers are basically looking at no study's perfect, right? And you want to see, like, to what degree do the limitations of the study to what degree are they outweighed by the strengths of the study and what it contributes to the literature. All reviewers and editors are making that kind of judgment call. And the reviewer went further and said, I'm raising all these issues because I think you did a lot. I think you did I think you overdid it. I think you ran too many analyses. You had too many measures in there. I think the paper would be much better if you streamlined it in some ways. And so what we did was we took the work to heart, and we said we removed some sets of analyses to the paper. Now we focus on these in particular, and we justified focusing on this limited set of findings in the introduction and the discussion. This was an interesting one too. The author went back and said, the reviewer went back and said, I hate to harp on all this. There are some elements of the work that are underpowered. And then what we did was we went back and calculated power estimates for the analyses and said, look, with this reduced set of findings, you see that we were well powered to detect effects. So you might have noticed that this comment has like a 3A, 3B, 3C, 3D, 3E, 3F. It's okay to do that. In fact, when a reviewer gets really caught up in something that you have here, it's good to sort of step back and say, this is gonna be a lot of work, but this person thinks it's really, really important. So I want to document in the cover letter how many different things we did to address this comment. Really important comment. The way that you make it clear to a reviewer that you think the work is important is by highlighting. We did this thing, and this thing, and this thing, and this thing to address this comment that the reviewer thinks is really important, essentially. So we're going with hands because sometimes when you work on these revisory submits, you come to a crossroads. You say to yourself, I've handled everything except reviewer 3, comment 8. It's a doozy. The co-authors are at a loss. I'm at a loss. I don't know what to do with this one. In those contexts, quite fine to contact the editor. We had a paper that came out that came out this year, where we got a set of comments from a reviewer that led us to think, man, this person does not like this paper as written, but the frame, the way in which we wanted to write the paper, was something we were not going to budge on. And so what we did was we sent an email to the editor and said, look, reviewers who hated the way this was framed, but here's the reasons why we want to keep it the way it is. So we reaching out to you first because, we want to know, we essentially asked them, we want to know if this is a deal breaker. Are you going to be okay with us sending it back if we're going to keep the frame as it is? And what the editor did, responded that day and said, actually, I'd like it to stay this way. Whatever you wrote in your email, put it in your cover letter, please. Because if the editor was going to go back and be okay with the way that you set things up, they don't want to upset reviewer 2 and say I'm just going to ignore that you said all these things. The editor benefits from that kind of justification as well. But so it's quite fine if you find a comment where you're like, I can't fix it, and I want to get an honest evaluation from the editor about whether or not this is a deal breaker. If I don't fix it, is this paper rejected? Because then I'll just go somewhere else. Right? It's okay to go to an editor for that. Okay. So here's the thing with reviewing. Who here is reviewed? Okay. How much do you get paid for that? None of us get paid for that. It's all pro bono work, all free. All free. And so when a reviewer is clicking yes to evaluating your paper, you're taking between 1 and 4 hours of their time. They're reading the paper, they're composing commentary. If they say revise your submit, they're kind of already saying, I'll look at it again and add another 1 to 3 hours of my time looking at this over again and providing feedback on the revision. All right? So in that context, make it easy for them. Do things like make a really clear cover letter, note the page numbers in the cover letter, where you revise stuff, how you revise stuff. Under some circumstances, giving direct quotes. And what I do, you know, open book, total open book, highlight everything in the paper that you fix without going too overboard. Let's say you completely rewrite the paper. Don't send them back something that's all yellow. You know, don't do that. But in that context, like make it easy enough where if a reviewer is strapped for time, they can just go in and just look for the yellow, and then just see like, okay, they fixed that. Sometimes, at like second or third revision, the comments become so minimal that if your cover letter is clear enough, they might not even read the manuscript. They might just look at the reviewer comments. They might just look at your cover letter and say, like, did they fix what I said they were going to fix? Okay. Yeah. So we got a response back for the R&R that I was originally showing you from the other commentary, right? The one with the context and the social anxiety stuff. Reviewer 2 read over the revision, thought we were kind of responsive, but wanted to see some other things, right? So one thing that was an element in the sample that we had to address in the commentary was, in a lot of our work, we'll pool two samples together, two subgroups, like a clinic referred piece, like where the kids are coming in for an evaluation for social anxiety, and a control piece. Kids they're the same age, same gender, more or less same gender breakdowns, and all the demographic characteristics are more or less constant across groups, but they're two different groups because the adolescents in one group aren't being evaluated for social anxiety, and the other ones are. And so the reviewer came back with a really great comment, which is, you want to test in there whether or not the findings that you're seeing in the entire sample generalize within the two subgroups. Like, to what degree can you be confident that these estimates, that the parameter estimates you have, the correlations, the variances, all those things are more or less constant, with the one thing being different, that one group is going to be more elevated on some of the constructs relative to the others. And so the reviewer gave us a useful paper to look at that gave us the formulas that we would need to cut to make sure that this wasn't an issue, and we just reported it back. Now we include in our data analytic plan the very formulas, the very calculations that the reviewer 2 wanted us to make, and this is what we found. Nothing to see here. And then we also we reported findings from the preliminary analyses that now we describe in the data analytic plan. And then what we also did was in an extra set of analyses. The reviewer didn't ask us to even do this, so we thought to ourselves, let's do let's do the extra analyses that the reviewer asked us to do. Let's go one step further. One of the key things that this reviewer cares about this is that maybe referral status, the distinction between these two groups, is a marker, a proxy for some of the things we're looking at. If you control for it, the findings go away. So what we did is we ran the analyses with this piece as a control variable. General pattern of findings are the same. You know, so part of it is also guesswork. You do exactly what they say, but then you also start thinking, if they care about this, they might also care about this extra thing. Let me just go ahead and do that too, just to be on the safe side. Okay, this one's going to be simple, but we're still gonna talk about it. So typos, grammatical things, all those kinds of things. My good friend Armando Pina, editor over there, is shaking his head because you know exactly what I'm thinking. Yes. So why are we going to spend a couple minutes talking about typos? I'll tell you why. I know you guys won't do typos. I know you guys won't do that stuff. But among people who do, people who aren't in this room, when editors get those papers and we see that stuff, our automatic thought is, if this is sloppy, I can't imagine the science underneath. What's under the hood is disgusting, because what of here is all scratch marks everywhere. What's the deal, right? And so that colors our perceptions of things. And sometimes in cover letter, in decision letters, if something that I'm going to reject is riddled with typos, I might say, like, the last comment might be something like, I found a lot of these. This wasn't the issue that sunk your paper, but it really, it did make us question whether or not the work was conducted well. That kind of thing. Yes, Armando.
Yes, totally, absolutely target. But I do want to So let's not confuse those two things. We have it very clear. Those are two separate things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true, Armando. Good point. That these that when we're thinking about typos, it's not necessarily a thing where it's like, oh, we think there's a language barrier. That we get a lot of journals get a lot of submissions from folks from where the primary language that we report findings in isn't consistent with their primary language, and so those are things we look out for as well. It's a good point, Armando. Yeah, they're not treated the same way. Okay, some smaller points. This will not happen with all revisions that you send back or all pieces of commentary that you send back, but there's some things that are probably important to think about. So, what does this mean? Not technically a thing on the operations board, but I'm going to go ahead and use it anyway. The title of this slide is a sentence I put in every one of my cover letters. We will be pleased to make any further revisions. Doesn't that make you like, more? I've heard some authors will send back a cover letter. They're like, now that we did all this, it's accepted for publication, right? Yeah? Now, are we done? This is over? Are we done now? Don't do that. No. Look, like I mentioned before, peer review is a quality control system. If you tell the editor and the reviewer and the reviewers that you are not going anywhere, you will keep on fixing this until they give up. They will take your word for it. They will give you the benefit of the doubt. They will say to themselves, that author wants the same thing we want, the best possible representation of their work. All right? So by saying we would be quite pleased to make any further revisions, you're basically telling the editor and the reviewers, like, I'm here as long as you think something needs work. Okay? Yeah, and sometimes when a paper hangs on the razor's edge, I'll put that second sentence in there when I'm not quite sure if it's going to get rejected or eventually accepted, whether the manuscript is ultimately accepted or not. Because I use that sentence because I'm telling them, look, regardless of what happens here, you made the paper better, so thank you for that. And then, quite pleased to make any further revisions. What do I mean by solemn? So going back to pro bono, right? You know what makes an editor's blood boil? Like just simmer, it's all gone, evaporated blood. When a person gets a fair review at a journal, gets their paper accepted, paper comes out, I invite that person to review a manuscript from that same journal where they were able to solicit advice from the reviewers that I picked and said, nope, decline. Nope, decline. Nope, decline. Like basically like 4 or 5 times I'm inviting them and they're declining. Maybe 1 or 2 of them, you're on vacation, sure. You're gonna get married soon. Yeah, of course. Please don't accept this, please. You're moving. They of course don't accept it. But this process only is useful insofar as people give back once they've been given something themselves. Right, so just be a good citizen. Don't necessarily accept every single review request you get, but over time, just take notice that when people invite you to review on that same journal that you had the benefit of getting fair reviews, they're basically saying like this isn't like a barter thing, but be a good citizen, please help us because we need your help. And by the way, you don't have to wait for that invite. Once you've published a paper or two in a content area, there's nothing keeping you from emailing an editor and saying, I know you probably get a lot of these requests, but I'd like to review for your journal. Here's my CV. I'm here. I'm available if you want me. If you want me to review the work. But this is usually something you do after you've already published a couple papers. Ooh, I always bank on getting this question, so I started including this as a slide. What do I mean by wishbone? What if you get 2 reviewers, and comment 1 says to do one thing for reviewer 1, and comment 5 for reviewer 2 says another thing, right? Discrepant, like you can't do one and the other one at the same time, right? These are my favorite comments because it's 2 comments I get to address with one thing. Like, we acknowledge that both are useful points. Reviewer X said this, reviewer Y said this. Upon careful consideration, we're going to do the one that we like to do. Now, is that a foolproof plan? Nope. Maybe reviewer Y feels more. It feels more tied to the way they wanted you to fix it relative to X. Maybe reviewer X, maybe reviewer 1 was like, yeah, sure, do this. Let's throw away a comment. But reviewer 2 was like, this is really important. You don't know that. So in that context, you can, just acknowledge to the editor, there's a conflict here. Because again, the editor is handling 20 of these things at once. Other people's submissions. So this is really to highlight to the editor, I got inconsistencies here. I had to go one way. And then the likelihood that it gets rejected outright because you went with one of the comments that they thought maybe was the one you shouldn't. They're probably not going to reject it outright, but they're going to come back and say, maybe this wasn't the right way to go. Here's another way. I think we should go this way. Okay, what does that mean? Now we're getting dark, right? So if you think you're going to be late, like it's day 43 and paper's due in 2 days, ask the editor for more time. When people ask me for more time with the journal that I edit, I give them whatever they ask for and a week, at least a week afterwards, because I'd rather them send me a thing that they're happy with and pleased with than a rush job. That just makes everybody's life harder. So most editors are in that space. And if an editor is like, no, you got to send it in on time, that's their problem, not yours. That probably means they don't have enough papers to fill the next issue. So that's their problem. Anyway, but most editors, 9 out of 10 times, you ask them for more time, you're probably going to get it. Oops. So the picture's going to get kind of funny in a second, but you could probably make a guess what I'm thinking about with that one. So here's the thing with reviewing. Nobody here took a class on how to go through peer review. Very few people take any classes in reviewing. And in fact, when you've seen randomized controlled trials about ways to do reviewer training to increase reliability, they don't tend to work very well. All right? And part of that's for meaningful reasons. When editors select reviewers, they typically will pick one reviewer with some superpowers, and then another reviewer with other superpowers, like a content expert versus a quantitative person versus somebody who knows the field really broadly. Those people aren't going to look at the paper the same way. So some of these inconsistencies among reviewer comments should be expected. But there might be some circumstances where reviewers are not only giving you feedback, but they're conveying it very harshly. And this is I'm giving you this piece of advice with the caveat that you use it very, very rarely. Okay? So that paper that I was showing you at the beginning of the workshop, the Missed the Boat one. What we did after we got the decision letter, but before we sent back the revision, was that we sent an email to the editor, and we said, we're really excited to address the commentary, but reviewer 2's tone, it's so weird. It's a weird tone. We just wanted to put this on your radar. What usually happens is the editor will come back and say, so sorry, would you like me to restart the process all over again? To which my response is, no, I want to keep on going. That's fine. I just wanted to put it on your radar. All right? And you do that because you already got the R&R, right? So, why chance it? You might redo this process and have 2 reviewers that hate it, right? At least one person liked it. You know what you're dealing with, right? But you do this first to highlight the tone, because again, editors got 20 of these things in their desk. They didn't read this nearly as closely as you did, right? Because it's your paper, it's not theirs. And then the trick is afterwards, set the expectations where you say to the editor, the tone was weird, and then don't use that tone. Be very constructive. Okay, isn't that great? That's my favorite. I'm so happy. I'm so proud of myself that I found 2 copyright-free images that can do they can relay this and me not having to say it. So that last piece with the nasty reviewer, Could be they had a bad day, right? There are some people in this business that will have a bad day for you whenever they see your paper, right? It's more like a bias than a reliability, right? That's bad. You might say to yourself, well, this doesn't help me at all. These are all anonymous reviews. Nobody tells me who they are. A few people do. Every once in a while, somebody does sign their name at the bottom, but it's very rare. Reviewers leave fingerprints. Under some circumstances, you can treat this like CSI and just look through the comments and you're like, isn't it weird that they told me that I didn't cite that enough, and then I didn't use that person's measure, and we didn't say that our results conform to that. Reviewers can reveal themselves in all kinds of ways. Sometimes with their language, the way that they discuss language. Sometimes you read a line and you're like, that line looks really familiar, and you go back and read some of the articles that you cited and you're like, oh, it must be that guy. With these kinds of circumstances where you're trying to identify somebody who probably is not going to give you a fair evaluation of your work, you do not need proof beyond a reasonable doubt. You need reasonable suspicion. That's it. Just some reasonable suspicion that this person might not be fair, right? And then what do? Well, several years ago, I discovered one of these kinds of reviewers from my own work, right? And then I contacted a friend of mine, who of course will remain nameless. And I asked this person, I think I have somebody here who, if I'm an assistant professor now, if they were to get my paper, every single time I submitted a paper, I'd get nothing published. What do I do? And this mentor of mine was really kind. This person said, I get this. I get this too. Here's my person, because I actually told this mentor who this reviewer was, and this mentor said, here's one of mine. And in fact, this happens, and what I do is three things. I name the person in the cover letter. I respectfully request that they don't review the paper. And then I say, this is so bad, if I think that I'm being invited to review their work, I decline. Because think about it. If you think somebody's being unfair to you, how fair do you think you are? Seriously, why would you possibly try to convince somebody that you can objectively so what you do is you put it on yourself and that person. And if you do that, the likelihood that an editor picks that person for review drops down dramatically. So this is what I do. Due to scholarly conflicts of interest, philosophical differences, irreconcilable differences, I want a divorce, and I want this person to be divorced from all my work. They can read it if they want to later on when it's published, but please don't evaluate it. So then I just tell them that, and then I say, look, this is going to make your job, I know this is going to make your job harder because I'm saying don't invite this person. And in the don't invite piece, I wouldn't go more than like 2, because when you start saying don't invite this person and this person and this person, then it just makes you look defensive, right? So there's probably 1 too many X's in there, at least. But then I always just say, look, respectfully request that they don't review the manuscript. But here's some people who can be fair. Oof. These are brutal. Every once in a while, you'll do all that you think you have to do to revise a paper and to eventually get it published, but the editor says, on further evaluation, we don't want it anymore. We're just going to break up, sorry. It's not you, it's me. In that context, go back to part 1 of Brain. Let it sit for a few days, and then start seeing, is this a thing where you should take your business elsewhere, go to another journal, or is this one where you say to yourself, I want to see if they'd reconsider the decision? I'd use that tactic sparingly, because, when you get a paper rejected from a journal, you don't know if that's the last paper you'll ever submit there. So you don't want to be in a spot where you get into a a back and forth with the editor unless you really feel strongly about the paper eventually having a home there. Every once in a while, the editors will allow for it. But I'd pick those battles sparingly, wisely. And then, in that context, go back to the reviews like you will with a rejection. Look for those comments where you're like, are those deal breakers? Maybe those are the things that might be deal breakers at another journal. And then try to see what the best case scenario is, and try to figure out where you should go. Should you shoot for a journal in that same kind of like tier, or maybe go a step or two down? Maybe this paper isn't as good as you think it is, kind of thing. Any clarifying questions? Because I'll take other. How are we doing on time, Jason? 46. Huh? 46. Yeah, good. Thank you. Great. Okay. All right. So I always end this thing with a little bit of motivational stuff. So you mind if I do it? You okay? Okay. So over the years, I've learned that the best of these workshops do two things. The first thing they do is they give you tools to take home with you and apply to your work. But the second thing they do is that they spark something inside you. They motivate you to do more. All right? They spark a fire. So we're going to end the workshop with some fire, okay? So I'm going to recite an excerpt from a poem that I really, really like, and then I'll talk a little about peer review. So these lines appear at the end of the poem, Ulysses by Lord Tennyson. All right. We are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven. That which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. So we talked a bit about the peer review system and its use in evaluating scientific work. Scientists created the system hundreds of years ago, and the system is as imperfect as those tasked to sustain it. But the system itself reflects the very nature of the scientist's task to serve. Science is hard, full of obstacles, slow, underfunded, not pretty, and not perfect. It's easy to view the peer review system as a barrier to getting your work out for others to see, for others to use, to inspire the world around them, and improve the world around them and inspire the people who inhabit it. But here's the thing. The best parts of this system also strengthen our science. Each time an author subjects their paper to evaluation by their peers, the process of revising and finalizing that paper hardens their resolve and sharpens their thinking. And both the authors of the paper and the reviewers become better scientists because of it. Right. So in the end of this, when you encounter peer review, when you think peer review is unfair to you, remember that you're part of this team, this team of scientists, and each team member goes through the same things you do. And peer review, it is only a system. It doesn't have aspirations, spirit, dreams, drive, grit, or tenacity. You do. This system can never be stronger than you. It can never get the best of you, so long as you persist, so long as you proceed. Workshops like this exist to give each and every one of you the tools to become great scientists. For some of you, these kinds of workshops may even help to rekindle that fire inside you that drew you to science in the first place. In return, all I ask is that when you get back to work, you push harder than you did before you came here. Persist and proceed. Thank you.